Our choline requirements must be met with the diet. We can endogenously synthesize a portion of it, but we do need to get it from the diet. Currently, only 1 out of 10 American adults are getting enough choline in their diet to meet the adequate intake. And even when people meet the adequate intake, in some studies, 10% of those adults will actually have something called fatty liver, which can be prevented by higher intakes of choline. And finally, this was a recent article in my own journal, my own association's journal, American Dietetic Association. Some people feel the adequate intake may overstate what our true needs are, but this is not the case. We really need the choline. Okay, so without enough choline, we can actually become sick. We can get fatty liver, and that's directly due to the lack of the liver's ability to transport fat out of it, which requires choline. We can see elevations in muscle enzymes. There has been a study that's found association with neural tube defects with low intakes of choline in pregnant women. And in pregnant women, their own levels of choline become depleted if they do not take enough, because the baby does take so much of it. Now, what we need to do is consider the increases in learning problems among children and the epidemic of fatty liver disease. Both of these are big problems for our country. And I wonder if there's a connection with our low choline intakes. Remember, only 1 out of 10 Americans are meeting the adequate intake. That's a pretty low level. The Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee does know this. In fact, in their own report, they remark on the importance of choline, and they state that we should take in a modest amount of eggs, among a few other foods, to help correct this problem. Interesting, eggs are an excellent source of choline. They contain over 250 milligrams in 2 large eggs, which might be a typical breakfast for some people. And there's been a study that showed that plasma choline levels were actually associated with egg intake. Eating eggs daily does not increase either the risk of heart disease or diabetes, and I think most good nutritional scientists know this. I don't think it's any big secret. That's why I'm really surprised the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee doesn't really understand that dietary cholesterol has little effect on heart disease. And Zeisel himself has suggested that we should include more foods such as eggs and liver in a woman's diet to help her get enough choline while she's pregnant. That would certainly help her baby. And also there could be a supplement, but there's very few supplements of choline. It just isn't really done. Now, this is the most telling part. I don't know if I'm going to read this whole thing. You should have my PowerPoint slides in there, and going to be posting the actual references for all this on the websites where we have all this information. This first person remarks, she's from the Agricultural Research Service, she's not on the committee, that individuals only have, there's only about 10% of Americans getting enough choline. So Joanne Slavin was quite surprised with this, and she wanted to know what the problem was. Well, it seems to be that most choline comes from animal sources. So right there we have a problem, right? You know, that wouldn't be a good foods group to encourage Americans to eat more of. The chairman, Linda Van Horn, basically pointed out that these are the shortfall nutrients, calcium, potassium, fiber, and choline. Now, the Dietary Guidelines does emphasize calcium, potassium, and fiber, but they kind of forgot about choline, unfortunately. Okay, this is really telling. There was a discussion here about tail wagging the dog. Basically, the member Pearson felt that if we dealt with the choline issue, we'd be ignoring the larger issue of the high dietary cholesterol. So, at the expense of keeping cholesterol in our diets low, we should just not even worry about choline, because it's not really important. And I guess they ran out of time, because they didn't have time to really research this issue. Guess we'll have to wait 5 more years. And again, I think this is interesting. Joanne seems to be a supporter, Joanne Slavin seems to be a supporter of eggs. She remarks they're very high in protein, great for kids, and getting more quality protein into people who are trying to keep their calories low. So she wanted the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee not to let cholesterol make the decision here. But member Pearson said, well, I'm going to read this, but also to remind you that the cholesterol is in the yolk of the egg and the protein is in the white. And you can actually do something about that, which is, I guess what he meant is don't eat the yolks. But that's where all the choline is, all of it. So now choline's been sent to the back of the line because we've had to triage our nutrients. Okay, so choline isn't really all that important. And incidentally, there was some laughter when we were describing fatty eggs, or they were describing fatty eggs. I'd like to listen to that transcript just to see how that came down, but this is verbatim from the written transcript. Now, if we go with the dietary guidelines, what they say now, the 2010 version, we're really supposed to take between 200 and 300 milligrams of cholesterol in, less if you have pre-existing heart disease. Okay, this is to prevent us from having, cardiovascular disease. We know that an egg, the yolk itself, contains about 200 milligrams of cholesterol, so we're kind of stuck. We really can't eat more than one egg a day. But actually, we're doing even better than that, according to the USDA. We're only eating 1/4 of an egg a day. Isn't that great? That's about 0.4 ounces. That's just what the USDA wants us to do. So we've really listened to that message and taken it home. And I can tell you, for most of my patients, most of them fear eating eggs. They always say, really? I can eat them every day? You mean I shouldn't alternate with oatmeal? I said, no, you can eat your eggs and you can have some oatmeal with them. And they seem to be very puzzled how I can say that with such conviction. Anyway, eggs could really help us meet our choline shortfall in this country because there's 125 milligrams in each egg yolk. And in fact, in the United Kingdom, they don't seem to have a problem with eggs. They think they're good because they contain lots of other nutrients, not only choline, protein, iodine, vitamins D and B2, and I think we're going to be finding out they have vitamin K2 in them when they're pastured, and they certainly have some vitamin A, which the United Kingdom Food Standards Agency did not mention. So there's a little more about eggs. They call the fat, the DGAC, or the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, call the fat in eggs solid fats. That's that bad word, that bad food we shouldn't be eating. And they did remark, I didn't go over this, but they did remark we should deal with high-risk groups. But in the final document, there is no word on choline or eggs or anything that should be included in a pregnant woman's diet other than the usual things we've been hearing for years, which are important, but let's not forget about choline. And finally, this was in one of my trade journals, 88 Times, American Dietetic Association Times. I think this is what they think our children should be eating. I think that's a sad state of affairs. Thank you.